O nauna I te hala me ta lehua. E hale lehua no iana ta no e. Ta uno ia I ono I nei. E li anei ho I o tahiti mai. A hiti mai no oko. A hiti puno me te aloha. Aloha e. Aloha e. Aloha e. Velina mai ke aloha I ka Aina. Aloha mai ka ko. Welcome to our first effort for our KuaMoʻolelo Web Walaʻau series, brought to you by our entity, Aloha Kuamoʻo Aina. Really honored and humbled to have all of you folks out there today. Let me go ahead and introduce ourselves. So we are Aloha Kuamoʻo Aina. We're a small entity nonprofit working to Mālama, important, pivotal, critical piece of Aina in Kona, Kuamoʻo. And we're going to talk about that a little more tonight. And our mission is essentially to help advance Aloha Aina as consistent with the moʻolelo of the battle of Kuamoʻo. So mahalo for joining us here tonight. I want to introduce myself. So I'm Kamanamaikalani. I'm trying to help support these efforts, and I'm joined by our awesome board members. So Dr. Jonathan Kamakaviva Osorio, Uncle Neil Hannes, and Uncle Keola Beamer, our board president. So mahalo nui everyone for joining us and being here. And our effort with this KuaMoʻolelo Web Walaʻau series is just a chance to share some of the moʻolelo and an engaged community in this pivotal, critical time for Hawaii. And given the changes that we've experienced with COVID, this is a new creative way where we would be doing this out on the Aina. We're doing this now live from your living rooms or wherever you're taking this call. And so mahalo for that, for the time, and mahalo to each of you, for your resilience and getting through this incredibly challenging period in Hawaii's history. And I think tonight we're going to share some of the reasons why perhaps this moʻolelo may resonate with each of us. So this is the first part of the series. We will be having a total of 4 series. And our episode 1 tonight is called Mālama ko Aloha. So mahalo nui again, everyone, for joining us. So we're going to open our conversation tonight with a moʻolelo shared by this incredible, I think we would call her a mana wahine today in the sort of vernacular we use, this incredible woman. She was my grandmother, and I tell this story often, but I was punahele by default, the only grandchild. So you can just see that embrace and that aloha that we shared. And the crazy thing is, although she's passed on and I don't look like that little guy there anymore, that relationship, that bond, whenever in my life I'm met with a challenge, I can hear my tutu's voice. And I think for many of us listening out there, we can recall that relationship. And what I want to share about my grandmother, and we could do an entire series on that, but what you should know is this was an incredible woman of aloha. She was one of the most, in my life, the most gracious, loving, olu waipahe, heart and soul that you will ever meet. And, that embrace and that hug, I miss every day. But she also had this side of her that was completely fearless, unwavering, committed, immovable, when there was something that challenged her beliefs and her mana'o, and those are some of the lessons, that she kind of passed on. And we're going to open tonight with her telling of the Battle of Kuamoʻo. And we're going to have a chance for some reflections. For those of you watching on live stream, Please share mana'o comments, questions in the chat that we'll get to later. And I want to say, you know, this is our mo'olelo and our story, but we know and recognize plenty people's kupuna, plenty ohana have mo'olelo about this place and these stories. And so mahalo for allowing us a chance to share tonight. So, yeah, thank you, Kelsey. Give us a few seconds just to get the video queued.
An important fact about this chant is that it occurs in 1819, the year of the death of Kamehameha I. So that was a very tumultuous time, and Liholiho becomes Kamehameha II. So the scene is, you know, the death of Kamehameha I, and then all of these events take place. Well, this should be a very interesting segment with the Battle of Kuamoʻo in 1819. And we are at the south end of Kona. The chants talk about the lava flats. I don't think it's so flat. When we've gone there, it's a little hilly, not too bad. But at the end of Ali'i Drive, where the road comes to kind of a circle there are the slain bodies of the warriors. And the bodies were just covered with rocks and left there. And this was a battle of Hawaiians against Hawaiians. The conservative Hawaiians led by High Chief Keola and his wife, Princess Manono. I think she figured very prominently in this whole scene. And Liholiho, Kamehameha II, that favored, as did Ta'ahumanu, the abolition of the kapu system, the abolishing of the old religious ways, and Keola saying, no, let us leave the old religion intact. Wow, what a tumultuous time that was. But the Hawaiians did it themselves. This was before the missionaries arrived in 1820. So the cousins go to battle. And in the chant, Manono asks her husband if she can take part in the fray, and he says no. But he will fix a hali'i for her made of uluhe fern, and she can rest there and watch the progress of the battle. She wanted to get in the fray. But with Kekuakolani's army and their hand-hewn spears. And there was Liholiho's forces with cannon and musket. Oh, wait. Kekuakolani Manona's army, they were no match. So early on, she sees her husband fall with a musket shot, and she runs down wailing, and when Grandma told it to us, I started to cry. She covers his face with his cape, and she picks up his spear, and she goes into the battle. And she keeps chanting, Ko aloha ea, ko aloha. Keep your love, keep your love. No matter what obstacles come to Hawaii, keep your love. Boy, that's pretty powerful. Big lump in my throat. But it was real. And I'm proud to bear her name. I just wish I had the guts and gumption that she had, picking up that spear and going into battle. And then all of the forces taken to the stockade. You can just imagine the tears, the sadness, their voices calling out, Ko aloha ea, ko aloha. Keep your love, keep your love. And it's so quiet in Kona at night. There are no breezes, and so we imagine that all these voices are heard in the stockade, and they're wafted across to Ahuena, Kamakahonu. And Liholiho hears, and he's wondering, what are those voices saying? And he comes at dawn, and he listens at the gate, and he hears them saying, Ko aloha ea, ko aloha. Keep your love. There'll be no obstacle for Hawaii if you keep your love. That was the last battle, 1819, the Battle of Kuamoʻo. That's why this chant and this hula is so important, not just as a family message, but it's the belief that that's the way the world should live, in love. No matter what obstacles come, keep your love. Hard to live that, but we try.
You do a good job.
We try. But I don't tell that story without the lump in my throat. It's so real, and when you think of the suffering of the time and standing up for what they believed was right, you really have to commend them, in spite of the politics of the time, to keep your love. That surmounts everything. It doesn't matter who we are, where we come from. Keep your love. Wonderful admonition.
Oh, mahalo. So, amazing to hear this moʻolelo 21 years ago, recorded from my grandmother, and resonant and powerful for today. So, when we think about this powerful moʻolelo, and mahalo to Hula Preservation Society and Auntie Maile for sharing the recording and doing the work of interviewing kupuna. But when we think about this powerful moʻolelo, this complex story within pivotal change, in the history of Hawaii, following the death of Kamehameha and this time of uncertainty. We know that there was waves of depopulation at that time because of diseases, and no one knew, what the pono future was for Hawaii, if you will. And it was definitely a time of hulihia or huliao. This word huli means to flip and to change, and ao is a time of changing and flipping, or hulihia, flipping on itself. And this was this period of abrupt, uncertain change for Hawaii's future. Something that we talk about a lot today, given what we've experienced over the last, 2 years with COVID, and then prior to that, this kind of questioning and social upheaval around the Mauna issues of social economic inequality all across our islands. And when we think of the moment we're in with climate crisis, there's a big meeting coming up in Scotland shortly. When we think about these efforts all across the world to address social justice, Black Lives Matter, people taking to the streets for land back for Indigenous peoples. There might be a lot of similarities, perhaps, between that feeling. In fact, maybe this is the closest we've been to feeling some of those feelings of our ancestors in the midst of such uncertain times and change and struggle. And so with those things in mind, I wanted to open up to our board to sort of ask, what do we think is the importance and value of this moʻolelo, of Kuamoʻo today, if, personally or for our broader lahui. And maybe, maybe we can start with John.
Aloha, everyone. Aloha mai kako. I'm happy to be here to share some reflections on, especially on the relationships of our ali'i nui at the time that this took place. And it's really wonderful that this moʻolelo starts with your grandmother's presentation, Keola, with your mother's presentation, because what she's really focusing in on is the human emotion and drama of that moment, because these are real people. Manono was a warrior in her own right, as was her husband. All of the people who met on this field of battle, they all did these very intentional things to defend what they believed was the correct course for their lives and for the life of the lahui. And this wasn't about greed. It wasn't even so much about power. It was about the succession, and it was about the fact that Kamehameha the Great, Kanaiʻaupuni, after all of those years of striving to become mo'i of Hawaii Island, and of taking Maui in battle and invading and conquering Oahu as well, and then the years of building and consolidation of all of these islands for the first time, right, from Hawaii to Oahu, and even the deal that he made with KuaMoʻolelo in 1810, that KuaMoʻolelo's lands on Kauai would become part of this aupuni when KuaMoʻolelo passed. All of these things were done by this very, very powerful, very intelligent, courageous, brave, and competent national leader. And when he dies, it really throws the lahui, the people who make up this nation, into some confusion and anxiety, for certain. This is not the first time this has happened. We look at the story of Kamehameha's predecessor on Hawaii Island, Kalaniʻopuʻu, and Kalaniʻopuʻu's predecessor, Alapaʻi Nui. When these great chiefs, after years and years of stability and rule, and the family of chiefs all knowing their role and their place, and having faith in that ruler, when that ruler dies, there is tremendous anxiety about the succession. And even those successors are appointed and are said by kauha, by the will of the chief, Kamehameha said that the rule would go to Liholiho, and the war god Kukaʻilimoku would go to Kekuaʻokalani. Even though he said those things, he is still gone. And what has to happen is that the ali'i, all of these families and all of these great chiefs, the ones who are still living, they all have to figure out, okay, this is what Kamehameha said. Do we go with that? Is Liholiho really the ruler? What added to the anxiety is that Liholiho didn't necessarily act like a ruler. In the month after Kamehameha had passed, there was a time of cleansing. There was a time where nothing should have really happened. There was a time of mourning. And so what had happened in that time of mourning is that many of the eating couple were not being observed. This had also happened before at the death of Kalaniʻōpuʻu. It's almost as though the society goes into a kind of craziness. And it is up to the mo'i to put an end to that, to declare the aikapu is back in place. Men and women must adopt their roles again. The chiefly kapu are clearly in place. And I am going to rule as my father ruled. But when we look at the mo'olelo, we see that that's not exactly what Liholiho does. And in fact, for a time, he's gone over and visited his cousin in Kauai. He's been with Kekuaʻokalani, and they're drinking rum together. They're having ava. They're basically trying to forget, it seems, that there's a tremendous responsibility ahead, and that Liholiho must come back and exert that responsibility. And what of Kekuaʻokalani? Does he want to be mo'i? He's been given Kukaʻilimoku. He's been given the war god. And we know what happens when that happens, right? Kamehameha was given the war god. Ki Walaʻau was given the rule. Who winds up as mo'i of Hawaii Island? Kamehameha. Umia Liloa, the most famous story, right? Liloa, the mo'i, gives the lands and the rule to Hakau, but he gives Kukaʻilimoku to Umi. Who is it who prevails? So you have to think, Kekuaʻokalani understands this mo'olelo, and he understands that he has a responsibility to defend the god and the traditions. And Liholiho, if he is to rule, he must declare the aikapu. He must gather the chiefs and their alliances around him. And I'm just going to say that at this point, it's even difficult for Liholiho to understand perhaps how to do that. Kahumanu clearly, Kahumanu, that favored wahine of Kamehameha, daughter of Namahana. She is descended from Kekaulike, the Maui chiefs. So many of the people in Kamehameha's administration in the early 1800s, right up until his death, that last 20 years, so many of the people who were really running the country were the sons and grandsons and daughters and granddaughters of the Maui chiefs. What does this mean for the Hawaii Island chiefs and the ʻIwi Kuamoʻo? And, all of these things are just, in some ways, it's the same story that we've seen before with Kalaniʻōpuʻu and Alapaʻi. In some ways, it's really different. And the things that make it different are also the fact that foreigners that come ashore have not observed the aikapu. They don't get sick, they don't die, they seem to prosper. And meanwhile, between 1777 and 1819, hundreds of thousands of Kanaka Maoli have died of diseases. How is the society to be righted? How is it to be brought together? It was Liholiho's duty to rule as mo'i, but Ka'ahumanu, when she introduces him to the chiefs, when they all gather a month after Kamehameha's death, she says, here are your lands, here are your guns, here are your chiefs, but you and I will rule together. Was she usurping power, or was she reassuring Liholiho this young man not to worry. I have it. I have the alliances. I have Kalani Moku. I have these other chiefs. I have Ho'opili. Everybody's going to support us. Don't you worry. We will prevail together. What should Kekuo, Kalani, and Manona make of this? And in the end, people will have different opinions of this. Perhaps if Liholiho had reinstated the Aikapu, the trouble would have been over. Perhaps not. Perhaps warfare was inevitable. Liholiho had to be able to assure all of the chiefs, all of the ali'i, that he could rule at least as well as his father. And I'm not sure that he could have done that. So the battle took place. And in the end, the only thing I can say is that it was each of these ali'i were fighting for what they believed they needed to do in order for their family, for their values, for their community, for the lahui to survive. And someone had to lose.
Mahalo, John, for those comments and kind of historical context and the complexity of these relationships amongst the leaders and leadership at that time. And, really harking back to people doing the best they could in a time of uncertainty, doing what they believed in. I'm going to get to more individual questions, but Uncle Keola or Uncle Neil, would you like to take a shot at this broader question, just the importance of this mo'olelo for today from your perspective for our lahui or individually?
Thank you. My name is Keola Beamer. I'm Kamana's uncle. Kamana's dad is my brother. And, so we were kind of raised with this story of Kuamoʻo. I remember my sweet mom, Kamana's grandmother, reminding his father and myself every day, if we, be going off somewhere, going off to school or whatever, Mom would always say, boys, remember, Mālama ko aloha, keep your love. So this was kind of instilled in us at an early age that aloha was more than a word. It was a way of being in the world. When we look at this this very difficult time for the lahui, the enormous cultural, political, emotional pressures that people were under, this tremendous change just right over the horizon with Western influences, pretty unrivaled, definitely unrivaled time in Hawaii's history, and so difficult to navigate. All, I think, Native peoples sort of face the issue of one foot in one world and the other foot in another world, right? Your native path and then the world of today. Hawaiians have to figure out sometimes, how angry are we going to be, when I'm at Kuamoʻo, I just have this tremendous feeling of sadness, of aloha for our departed ancestors, and this reminds us, the old adage: if you don't learn from history, you might accidentally repeat it. I mean, we certainly have much to learn about conflict resolution, and for me, I just think that we're so blessed to kind of be able to contemplate these lessons and perhaps work them into our own lives. I'll pass it over to my dear friend Neil.
Yeah, mahalo, aloha mai kako. Neil Hannes, I'm very privileged to be a board member of ACA and enjoy this long relationship of aloha with the Beamer Ohana, as well as with John. It goes back 50 or more years now, brothers. So it's been a while. Kamana, Your Honor, I mean, the beauty of Nona was she could tell a story, and she could, in such a riveting way that you felt like you were right there. And even as we watched that video, I felt like I was on that uluhe with Monona, watching what was going on and feeling the heat of the battle and the pain of the spears and the bullets. And so it brings me to a perspective of the participant, the makainana, the people on the ground, who, while all this hulihia is happening, and we're talking about a loss of life that makes our current pandemic look silly, look trivial, and conditions of shattering conditions that shatter the human psyche of, what is a God? Who is a God? What is right? What is wrong? What is, what should I do? That affect your livelihood, your lifestyle, your ohana, everything that you love. When all that is thrown into question, what do? You don't do nothing. You do something. And ka'aumanuli they're exercising their best judgment. I think, John, you put a nice framing of it. That's kind of really reflecting kind of an outward look to engagement with the world. And how do you engage in the world if you have no workforce to have anything produced by a society anymore, and so forth? But people on the ground, and in community looking, say, if we lose this system that isn't just governing who eats with whom and the hierarchy of the chief's genealogy, it's about, the take of resource and the management of land and the utilization of water and the distribution of resource and the consideration of not just the current generation, but future generations. All that is embodied in this delicate balance between Akua and Aina and Kanaka. So you take an element out and start changing out the Akua piece, you change the whole balance. And the whole balance is disrupted. And say, we don't need to get into a debate tonight over the right faith for everlasting salvation, and which faith that is. But what we can say and know for certain, the evidence is clear, that disruption disrupted our Aina and disrupted the quality of life for our lahu, right? When we see and we come in and we see plantations and we see ranches and we see all kinds of economic uses to kind of create an economic generation for economy for the islands, all for good reasons. Suddenly this whole, our ability to really sustain ourselves here and now, and to do so in a way that provides for a thriving land and resource base, changed. And it did not change for the best. We know that as a fact now. And today, and Kamala, your efforts are so on point with this, that we try to revive a regenerative economy. We try to revive those values that will help not only sustain our generation, but future generations. Where do we look to for guidance? We look back to that old system, and that kapu system, and the values that were intrinsic in that recognize that man is really that we are the servants. It is the land that is important. We deified that land because it gave us life. And we deified those things of nature not because we were animalistic or all the stuff I read, the demeaning stuff I read in Wikipedia and some Facebook posts, but because we recognize that if we took care of what gave us life, then that would be, that was godlike, and that was the right relationship we should have with the gods and with the Aina. And so I just think about that huge disruption that we still haven't recovered from, that hulihia. But we are so ma'atu now, we're so aware of the climate crisis and every other crisis, that what we see in the next generations that you're teaching, Kamana, and that you're part of, Kamana, and the ones that follow you, really are that commitment to kind of bring back those values, and for a reason. And for the same reason that that Kahumanu and Liholihu did what they did, and Kekuakalani and Manono did what they did, is so we survive. Mahalo.
Yeah, mahalo. Mahalo. Amazing insights and reflections, about that history of that battle. And, Uncle Neil's right. I mean, all of the challenges and stress that we face today can be overwhelming. I feel that way. It's a lot to juggle as a parent, as a educator, as a citizen, community member. And yet our ancestors made it through such a pivotal change, at a time when we probably lost, 8 out of every 10 Hawaiian. If we're being super conservative, maybe it's 6 out of every 10. Huge collapse, and it didn't happen all at that moment, but it was starting to happen, and people could see it coming. And and what incredible, manao about, I feel there is a lot of reasons, historical injustice that we face, systemic racism, white supremacy, legitimate reasons to be angry. And yet this reminder, right, of Mālama ko aloha, that's what keeps us who we are. That's what keeps our love for Hawaii and our place. And hard. Aloha is not easy. Aloha isn't weak. Aloha is fearless. But hard when you are feeling the eha, the pain, to refill that sense of aloha and confidence, that we can. So mahalo for those reflections. I want to, our next question here is back to Uncle Keola, and, thinking about, this sounds so weird, your mom, Ano, my grandmother, Auntie Nona, as most people knew her and know her as. Do you have reflections about her telling the story, or what do you think the importance of this moʻolelo was for her? And of course, I can jump in a lot, but what do you think?
It was really centering for her, and I mean, here she was, a single mom raising these 2 rambunctious boys, and on a teacher's income at Kamehameha schools. And, so there were challenging times. I mean, there were times when, of course, we had no money, right? I remember one time them talking about, we didn't have enough money for a postage stamp. But me and your dad, we didn't even know we were poor. I mean, because there was just so much love around us. There was music, there was laughter, there was love. But Kuamoʻo, you will, recall with great love that your grandmother had a spine, She was the manono of her own generation. She took on the big guys, and she stood tall. So manono was a centering inspiration for her entire life. And every time we'd go near that place, we'd always have to stop, up at Leke Leke, and she'd tell whoever we were with, or Ohana and friends, she'd, tell a story and point out where the fallen warriors, where the terrorists had been pulled down upon them, where they were laid to rest or so, that powerful story affected her whole life, and yours and mine, right? So grateful to have received that knowledge and aloha from her. An amazing woman.
Yeah, mahalo, Uncle. And isn't that the thing about our moʻolelo? The stories we choose to tell, right? That we pass on from generation to generation. These aren't, ancient things to just recall. They're sources of pride, of commitment. They're sources of teaching us today. And
powerful.
Yeah.
Years ago, when Jonathan and Neil, my brothers, when we were all in school, there's this professor at the university, James Dater, and he mentioned that the most financially rewarding occupation of the future is going to be storytelling. When he said that, I immediately thought of my mom and my grandmother, and I thought, God, my grandmother's not making a lot of money at this point in her life. But then years later, I sort of figured it out. Oh my God, yeah, he was absolutely right. I mean, moʻolelo is so powerful. I mean, the guys that tell us great stories in movies, they're making out pretty well.
Mahalo, Uncle Keola. And I can recall, maybe you remember, so Danby was my great-grandmother, my grandmother's mother. And, I think I was about 15, trying to be starting quarterback for Kamehameha, training every day. Blaine Geisen, was my coach and working so hard. That was my whole life at one point. I had these blinders on. But Ano said, hey, you got to come back to Hawaii Island. We're going to take Danby, who was my great-grandmother, and we're going to go around the whole island. We're going to go to her place she was born. We're going to visit Napo'opo'o, Ho'okena, and see, her house site. And I don't know how I got included, because there was you and my grandmother, and then there was her brother, Uncle Keola Maikalani, the older version of you, Uncle, the generation above.
Right.
And then Danby, my great-grandmother, and there was me. And it was such a powerful visit. We stayed all over with Ohana. I remember staying Kapapala Ranch and just going all around Hawaii Island. But when we got to Kuamoʻo, man, it was so powerful. I remember Uncle Keola making lehala the night before and sharing stories. And I had no idea that experience, that moʻolelo would play such a pivotal role in who I'm still becoming, and in that experience. And when I went back to football camp, my coach said, Blaine guy said, hey, what did you guys do there? And I explained to him and, this whole thing, and told him the whole battle of Kuamoʻo. And he looked at me and said, hey, Beamer, that's why you are the way you are. And I was like, what does that mean?
Yeah, right.
But there's so much power in our moʻolelo. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Uncle.
I do remember that vividly. And I still get chicken skin thinking of your grandmother out there on the ʻālava at her, age, walking way out there, and then just doing this beautiful oli of manono, e manono la'ea, so beautiful. And just her voice coming down in the wind from that area that she was, and we're all just kind of in tears. It was so powerful. The moʻolelo helps us find who we really are as human beings, right? In this life, we try to find our authentic self. Who are we? And those centering stories of our culture, of our ancestors, lead the way to that discovery.
Uncle. Hey, John, maybe I can come back to you and your thoughts, on moʻolelo in general, and the significance of this one for our people today. You gave us the historical context and the players, but what lessons do you draw, from a moʻolelo like this today? And sorry, John, I think you're muted.
In general, I've always believed that the stories we tell are the most important part of what people call history. It's not the record of statistics. It's not the record of who ruled or who was elected. It's not the record of so much of powerful people. It's the stories that people tell within their homes about their families. And I've always believed that from those stories, you get every individual, their behavior, the way they live in the world, the way they see it. I think it's just like Keola is saying, you learn those things from your parents and from your aunts, even from the friends that you grew up with. And this story, I mean, there's so much in the story about that is really just about family. It's, you know, you can almost forget about, you know, the traditions and ceremonies, the various statures of chiefs and ranks of chiefs, and it really comes down to family. You know, you'll recall that in the story, when Keola and many of the other ali'i from Hamakua's side are beginning to talk about revolt because the Aikapu has been broken or has not been reinstated, because Liho is clearly, and Ka'ahumanu and Keopualani are all basically eating together. And they're thinking about warfare, that Keopualani, right, sails off to try and meet with them and, you know, basically hold them in the family together. As a way basically of saying, you know, there has to be a way we can move forward on this. It shouldn't have to come to war. And she wants Kekuokalani to get on the canoe with her and sail back, right? And he says, no, I'm gonna stay with my men, which means, right, he's gonna stay with his warriors, which means they're gonna continue that march. They're gonna continue that journey up to the battlefield. And what does she say to him? You cut the navel cord. You cut the navel cord. It's almost as though she has to oki that, she has to cut herself off from this family member in order to have this battle, which is now inevitable, in order to justify it, in order to even consider it possible. And I really, when we send this out, when you think of that, you know, koalohala, right? When you think of that notion of Manono reminding us that the love we have for each other has to be larger, right? Larger than the fights, larger than the politics, larger even than the blood feud. If we are to survive, then, you know, I think this may be one of the most important stories of all.
Mahalo, mahalo, John. So much tremendous wealth of wisdom, really, you know, from this moʻolelo and us reflecting and sharing upon it, you know, from our lens today. I want to transition the conversation a little bit, and we're getting close to, I think we got about 15 minutes here left, but what you should know about Aloha Kuamoʻo Aina is, you know, we were able to sort of preserve. We worked with community. We had tremendous collaborators to help us kind of raise the funds to purchase the Aina, and want to mahalo the Shatar family and Keoki and the Paris Ohana. And, you know, and where Kuamoʻo sits today, you know, like much of Hawaii, you know, was under potential threat of development, you know. And I remember, you know, some of the things out of my 20s when Hokulia was being built, and, you know, the civil unrest and issues with that. And on one side of Kuamoʻo is a golf course, and, you know, further down is actually, you know, Hokulia. And like most of Hawaii, you know, if it's a coastline, you know, you have to deal with these issues of development, right? And at least in this one particular place, you know, I remember thinking in my 20s being frightened, like what would I do, you know, if development was to happen there. And now we know it will be preserved, but now that we have the Aina, you know, it's about reconnecting, and we worked with students and ohana and families and, you know, community out there. Kamwela Naihe was one of our first program directors. Monica Frazier worked with us for a long time, and so many hands have huli kalima ilalo have touched that Aina. But we face plenty challenges, you know. There's a raging goat population in Kona. People on other islands maybe get hard time believe, how do goats get out of control? They are out of control. And, they overrun our sites, and we have an area of native forest restoration. And, eventually we can't really do any work until we get all the goats out. But our efforts are the donors help us to eventually, we want to fence off the Aina and then get the goats out and do kind of large scale native forestation efforts. And of course, working with our cultural resource management, Wahikupuna team, and all these amazing Kanaka now that are getting into archaeology and understanding the richness and wealth of the structures of our ancestors. And so there's so much work, that remains to be done on the Aina itself. And, Uncle Neil, you've wanted to kind of frame this question for you. You've had so much experience in Aina and in restoration efforts, and helped to create Aina Ulu and all these awesome initiatives. But maybe you can share for the audience, what are some of the important benefits you think of restoring Aina for environment, culture, and maybe even recalling if there's ways to recall your relationship to Ano and how it might relate and exemplify.
Well, mahalo. My mind is a jumble of all kinds of things. This is a very rich conversation, and every new thought kind of triggers a whole set of other ideas to share and to talk story about. Keola, I never knew you guys were poor, because every time I showed up, and I showed up often at your doorstep, and your mom took me in, called me number 3 son, fed me, let me sleep there, is because you guys are so giving. You're so giving, and that goes back to the families involved here. Our culture and the tradition, and what we learn from the land is that it is that which feeds us, and that which nourishes us and takes care of it. And we have that relationship with the land, then it is incumbent upon us to extend those values and that graciousness to others, and so forth. And we see as we drifted into such a competitive world model, where it's about accumulation and amassing riches, and so you can afford that place at Hokulia, so you can afford that resort complex, that it's kind of that loss of that value of really of giving and hokipa is sad for our society, and it's created a lot of the pilikia and some of the frictions that we have and resentments that we have to one another that kind of cause our society to break down. So if you want to bring it back, there's 1,000 places to start, but one good one is certainly with the restoration of Aina and restoring that relationship. Number one, our planetary existence or existence on this planet relies upon that. Nainoa Thompson, as we took Hokulea around the world for Mālama Honua, comes back with the conclusion, I think he had it before, but I mean, it was certainly affirmed, says the fate of this planet will turn on the condition and the health of the oceans. The fate of the oceans will turn on the condition of the largest of those bodies, the Pacific. What is needed in the Pacific is the return of our ancestral values for it to be healthy. So if we want to think about reviving those values and reviving that relationship and that delicate reciprocal balance between Akua and Aina and Kanaka, it's for the planet's survival, number one. Number two, it's also meaningful to us as people. Three of us, John and Kamana and I share our friendship. Keola, I'd love to have you meet him someday, with a Maori gentleman named Joe Williams, who is now a Supreme Court Justice. And Joe would come in this seminar that we had at Stanford every year and co-teach with John. And he said something one time that every time I think of that, I think of Kuamoʻo. It says, under the herbs and grasses are the etchings of my ancestors, and each that goes missing is like a knife in my culture, and something I need to know about who I am also goes missing. The fact that the notion that we own land is nonsense. It is we who are owned. We are owned by this land, and so you got to connect to it. In my advanced age, you guys look really young, but as my advanced age, more people seem to be interested in doing oral histories, including Stanford did one of me for their archives for whatever crazy reason. But I talked a little bit about my youth, and my youth before I met you, Keola and John. Dad was in the service, so we moved around a bit, and I characterize that as a sense of rootlessness, not with a th, but with root. It was root because we were never in a place to settle, like, and put those roots in to really become pili to that place and know the resources, know your stream and know your ocean and know your wind and know your rain, know your mauna, and so forth, until we settled in Maili, and when I was like 12, and so we lived there since. But then I became part of the Kamehameha family. But those stories that you encountered along the way, Kamana and Keola, when you went around the island with Dambi and your mom, that's it. It's that connecting to place that helps us understand who we are, and the telling of those stories really helps really not only connect us with our eyes, but connect us with our hearts. That is so powerful. As part of that seminar, as Kamana, and John, we kind of focus on I'd raise the question, when did Hawaiians become Hawaiians? Because our ancestors the first travelers here came from elsewhere, Marquesas or Tahiti and so forth. We became Hawaiian when we became pili to this land, and we adapted to this place, and therefore became unique to anybody else on this planet. So if there's a need and a reason to go back to reconnect ourselves to Aina, and reconnect ourselves not just by being on it, but by aloha, by having aloha for it, and to caring for it, and seeing that it's productive, and seeing that it can again feed us as a society and a community, and uplift our community through the sharing of all that abundance. That to me is worth it. That to me is the sense of vai and momona that comes from a momona of the land, that really not only is us, because that's our ancestral tradition, but it's good for humanity.
Right on, Neil.
And that's it, right? Is the revival, reconnection with our ancestral practices and worldview, because they were so tied with our Aina, our environment, our nature. That it's part of the resurgence we're seeing around the world, of the recognition of, the rights of indigenous peoples and the value of their stewardship of natural resources. I mean, organizations like the Food and Organization of the UN, have kind of talked about how pivotal, indigenous knowledge is for agroecological production, and how these systems of producing food, are some of the key things that can provide resilience for climate change and crisis. And so there's so much there, and our islands that we love so much, there's these broader lessons and relationships for us to connect to all across the world, and I think that's a part of the hope of this conversation is, future series we're going to be bringing in other people. At the end, we'll have people even outside of Hawaii and discuss, what's the value of these moʻolelo and our connection to resources. And Uncle Neil, your work with Aina Ulu and all of these communities across Hawaii, I mean, you can see it mohala and mohaha today, where, many of my peers, are doing amazing work with restoration of fish ponds, in Heia and in Waipa and lo'i systems. And so there's so much action and activity. And then it kind of gets back to, this closing mana'o, and maybe we can kind of transition. But, when we do look back and we take our collective experience, why, some people think, whatever, it's just airy-fairy, it's, not rigorous enough. But I think what we've heard over and over again is these relationships and stories and connection to Aina is important. So So why is Aloha Aina important? Or, if you want to reflect on what does Mālama ko Aloha, mean to you? What's the value of keeping our love? And maybe we can start with John on that.
The mic, John, you got to unmute the.
Thank you, Keola. Keola, come back here, please. Our connection to Aina is something that brings us together as a people. There's no question about it. And all of the really, really important kinds of political and social and cultural movements that we have seen in Hawaii over my lifetime have been about reestablishing that relationship with Aina. But I'd argue that it's also been really about reestablishing our relationship with each other. And it's not that we lost it, and I don't believe that we lost it during the time of the kingdom. I don't believe we lost it after we lost control of the government. I believe that our people have always tried to bring our people together to meet adversity and poverty, dispossession, all of these things as a people. The leadership questions for me are always, how do we do that? What are the choices we make? And the things that we choose often mean that there are things that we're going to set aside and not follow. And this is where division happens. This is where argument and even hostility happens, even within our own people. So when I see a story like this one, it's not just the connection to the land. It's not just the need to Mālama this place and this environment. This is about holding on to each other. And even as we disagree, even as we fight among ourselves, and we've got to recognize that the things that we are fighting over are the things that we believe are going to be good for our people over and over and over again. I see this as a part of our makeup, and we've done this for 1,000 years. That's why ali'i fought each other. It was over the ability, right, to move forward, to do something new, to do something important and significant for the entire community. And we are still doing that to this day. That's what this moʻolelo is to me.
John. Uncle Keola, you have some last reflections on
Sure.
why this is
important? I guess I sort of view that whole idea, Mālama ko Aloha, keep your love. I sort of see it as a compass, a sort of a compass of light, helping me as I go through the challenges in my life. John hit it, right on the head when he was talking about, keeping our love for each other, I think we must learn to Mālama ko Aloha, cherish the light within ourselves and begin to see it in others, And we're human beings. We have a short moment in time on this earth, How are we going to use that time, Of all the things we can be, how about, kindness? How about aloha? How about we try to find our way through life's complexity with this beautiful concept of cherishing the love within ourselves and each other. In that way, we can grow to become people whose love made a difference in the world. Mahalo.
Mahalo, Uncle Keola. Not easy to do. Many reasons, things that are unsettling. So mahalo. Mahalo, Neil. Uncle Neil, would you like to offer some?
Sure. Mahalo. I think I've spoken to the Aloha Aina piece already, but Mālama ko aloha. Mālama ko aloha. I mean, you know, to me, there's a lot of verbs in there. I think aloha could be a verb, but certainly when you Mālama ko aloha, it's a double verb. Like, it's not a noun. It's not something you just have. It's something you gotta do something about. If you aloha something, you gotta do something about it, you know, and not just hold it when it's threatened or things are threatened. When it is in need, you gotta act, and sometimes that takes you. Sometimes you gotta fight for what you believe is right. And your Ano Kamana just so embodied that. She was the most tender person, nurturing and cuddly. She was also a keeper of standards. You don't mess up. Your language, your hula, she won't correct you, you know, because her love for the culture and the standard was so important, you know. So she did something about it. And when people violated teachers or students at Kamehameha schools or Hawaiian homes, you know, looking at review of the effectiveness of the Hawaiian Homes Commission, by God, she was a warrior, and she stood up and she made fights. You know, she took the fight, but she never lost that sense of love for all of the people, even the people she was fighting. And I was saying in our conversation before we got going that because John is teaching us Le Ka'ahumanu, written by sweetheart grandma Helen Deshay Beamer, who was a descendant of Manono who perished at the hands of the forces of Ka'ahumanu, and she writes this love song to the Ka'ahumanu society, but that extols the virtues of Ka'ahumanu. That tells me she fought for principle and not against that person.
Right.
And that somehow she had both the love to stand up and fight for something she believed in, and yet the love to forgive and to enjoy and embrace the humanity of another person. And so those things have been so inspiring, you know, to me my whole life, and even at this point. And I had a call, you know, to kind of be engaged. It kind of gets to, what do we do now? How do we Mālama ko aloha today? And I think that decision hits us every day. And a couple of days ago, it hit me in the form of somebody wanted me, good company, that's in the middle of a contested case hearing. And on the other side of the contested case hearing are certain Hawaiians who take umbrage with what they're doing. And I think I can understand both sides. And so the company saying, well, the lawyers for the company said, why don't you join the contested case? We want you to be a part of this. I said, I'm not going to join a battle to go fight on your behalf those other Hawaiians. If you want to build a bridge with those Hawaiians, I'm there. You know, I'll help you do that, so that you listen to them, they listen to you, and we build an understanding, so we have a stronger sense of consensus where we can, and we know where we disagree, where we disagree. But I'm not going to just be another one of those people that gets part of the system of governance these days, of litigation and contested case, and just how we want to polarize society and have one guy against the other. That's not our action. That's not where I want to be. And I think that the message of Manono and message of Kuamoʻo, message of Liho as he pardons all those warriors who fought against him, is that that's not our cultural background. That's not our heritage. So Mālama ko aloha.
Mahalo. Well, awesome conversation. Mahalo to each of you. Thank you for the patience and grace. I thought this was impossible when we first started our efforts to preserve Kuamoʻo. The dollar amounts, the efforts to do it seemed unachievable for me, you know. But I want to tell you, you can preserve your Aina, you can protect your place, and strength of the moʻolelo and building community around you, you know, can. And so I want to wrap up. Thank you so much to our sponsors and to all of you panelists, Uncle Keola, John, Uncle Neil, mahalo for all the mana'o you shared tonight, all of your work in community. and keeping our culture and Aina, alive. And I think most of all for trying in the midst of a challenging, lots of 4-letter words you can use about our world today, trying to keep our aloha, trying to center and ground ourselves and leave this place a little better than when we got it. So no leila, mahalo nui. And I think we're gonna close out with a nice mele. Mahalo. Oh, don't forget Kelsey, to everyone. Cheers for Kelsey Jorgensen, our program director and planner, and all of her efforts on this series and everything else. And Malia Nobriga and Kanaio Kana behind the scenes, Hawaii Nui Akea. So thank you guys so much. Mahalo, mahalo, mahalo.